Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to 24/7 Magazine's webinar, all about Sp02 testing, sponsored by Fluke Biomedical. I'm Carrie Forsyth-Stevens, the editor of 24/7 Magazine and your host. I'm here with an excellent speaker, Andrew Clay, Fluke Biomedical's project manager. Since joining the Fluke Biomedical team in 2013, Mr. Clay has been instrumental in the advancement of the industry-leading ProSim patient simulator portfolio. As such, he will add a wealth of knowledge to this topic. After the presentation, Mr. Clay will answer as many questions as he can live. So throughout the webinar, submit your Sp02 testing related questions via the Q&A box on your screen. Also, the complete slide deck is available for PDF download. Refer to the box on the right-hand side of your screen which says Slide Deck for Download and click on the link anytime during the webinar. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the first speaker, Andrew Clay.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you 24/7 for hosting this webinar, and really appreciate all the attendees for taking time out of their busy day to join us. We're going to be talking about Sp02. We've got a lot to cover. The presentation is relatively short, however. We're going to cover the basics, the clinical background, pulse oximetry technology, functional testers versus simulators, and performing measurements. Overall, an Sp02 sensor consists of a red and infrared light source and photodetectors placed at a pulsating arterial source, typically a fingertip or an earlobe. We've all seen these. They're very prevalent in the clinical atmosphere. Sp02 and SaO2 equals the concentration of oxygen in the blood. That's what we're trying to measure. On the clinical side, respiration starts the cycle of oxygen saturation through inhalation. Oxygen is picked up in the lungs where it dissolves into the bloodstream, and then the cardiovascular system moves oxygenated blood throughout the body on the arterial side and also picks up CO2 and other waste products to deliver back to the lungs during exhalation on the vascular side. Oxygen saturation refers to the fraction of oxygen-saturated hemoglobin relative to total hemoglobin on the arterial side. SaO2 is the direct measurement of the arterial O2 saturation using an invasive blood gas measurement, or ABG. Sp02 that we measure is a non-invasive indirect measurement of oxygen saturation, and we measure that at the periphery towards the bottom of the diagram. So why do we measure Sp02? It's a great indicator of physiological performance and overall health because we're looking at the tie between the respiration systems and the cardiovascular system. And we monitor to prevent organ damage, cardiac arrest, death, and other adverse clinical events. So low oxygen saturation can lead to many different clinical situations. The largest one is hypoxemia, where it's oxygen deficiency in the arterial blood flow. That's what we're measuring, and can lead to hypoxia. Hypoxia can happen when the entire body or a specific region of the body, an organ or tissue, is deprived of oxygen. So the whole body can get it at altitude, for instance, if climbers or high altitudes, you can result in hypoxia. And hypoxemia is what we're actually measuring with the Sp02. Factors that can affect the measurement: hypothermia, anemia, medication, light interference, skin pigmentation or tattoos, nail polish, scar tissue, movement artifact, and others. Basically anything that can obscure the light or obscure the measurement through the pulsating arterial source. Anything that might constrict the vasculature, such as hypothermia, temperature. Anything that might affect that measurement could affect its accuracy. So we measure at various points along the body. Most of us are familiar with the finger. However, on peds and neonates, you might see a foot sensor, and more recent technology in reflective, you can have a forehead sensor. Sensors in general, each manufacturer develops hardware and the corresponding firmware or software and develops an R curve for this specific combination. Each combination has a distinct and unique R curve. The test equipment companies such as us, work with the manufacturers to ensure the proper R curves for each type of sensor embedded in our functional testers. So how are these references derived? So the clinical trials are completed by the manufacturers, and these are typically what's called a breathe-down study, where a patient is actually deprived of oxygen while ABG or invasive blood gas measurements are taken. And this is how we develop the light absorption curve, or the R curve. So the transmissive technology is what's been around for a long time and what most of us are used to seeing. So there's a red and IR photodiode or LED on one side and a photodiode on the other. And we transmit through the finger. When we're using a tester, those devices need to be placed in accordance with where the detector is versus where the emitter is. Reflective technology is relatively new, and it's where the photoemitter and photodetector are on the same mechanical plane. There's also other types of sensors, such as the Massimo Rainbow, that require specialized test equipment. Standards. So the overarching standard for Sp02 measurement is the ISO IEC 80601-2-61, which is the particular requirements for basic safety and essential performance of pulse oximeter equipment. So mostly the medical device manufacturer is responsible for meeting those requirements, and it covers everything from the general requirements, hazards, alarms, symbols, documentation, etc. It also prescribes methods for the clinical trials to ensure accuracy of the pulse oximeter, including the breathe-down studies. But very specifically, quote, unlike many other types of medical equipment, pulse oximeter equipment is not designed to be calibrated after it leaves the factory. Secondly, there is today no accepted method of verifying the correct calibration of pulse oximeter probe and pulse oximeter combination other than testing on human beings. So this is very important from the standard that we do not have specific calibration methods other than what's in the factory. So IEC and ISO define a simulator, a calibrator, and a functional tester, and it's important to know the distinction between them. So a simulator is a test device that stands in for a human patient, and there's tons of simulators out there, from ECG to respiration and a host of other physiological measurements. The measurement accuracy for a simulator is expected to be comparable to measurement on an actual human being. Right now, today, there's no simulator for a pulse oximeter. It reproduces the optical properties on a broad range of patients, meaning that we can simulate blood under an Sp02 sensor and carrying oxygen or not carrying oxygen. A calibrator is a test device that can be used to adjust the accuracy of the medical device, typically a very accurate simulator. There's no calibrator on the market today, but the standard does define what one might look like. Lastly, what most of us manufacture is a functional tester, and it determines whether the pulse oximeter is performing as the manufacturer designed them to perform, and it tests the various R values versus displayed Sp02 reading along the R curve. So simulator versus a functional tester again. The Sp02 testers generate proper red and IR curves from manufacturer R curves, but are not capable of actually simulating humans. Therefore, they are classified as functional testers, not simulators. We look at annual testing, or testing in general. Per Toby Clark in the MDQA book, he recommends annually. Functional testers test the Sp02 sensor optically. Some of the functional testers include signals directly into the monitor, and some can test the cable for continuity. You should always follow the manufacturing service manual for which tests you should conduct and how often. So a typical test procedure for a standalone Sp02 device not integrated into a larger patient monitor would take about 10 minutes. The first thing we do is look at the physical condition, cracks in the cables, cracks in the case, any mechanical wear and tear. We then conduct electrical safety in accordance with the relevant standards. We would then look at doing any other preventative maintenance or cleaning as called for in the service manual. And then we perform testing specific to Sp02. Heartbeat accuracy, O2 sats, recorder operation if there is one, alarms, battery, and any other tests that are called out in the service manual. And then we document the test. We've got a couple products that test in this space. Our ProSim 8 tests the Massimo Rainbow and also tests a lot of other physiological parameters such as ECG, respiration rate, and others. And we can complete an entire patient monitor preventive maintenance in 5 minutes or less. We also have Onboard Automation and optional PC software for it. We have a smaller product called the Spotlight, which does basic measurements and is very lightweight and has battery powered and can be paired with other devices. We'd really like for you to connect with us. This is how we learn new topics of interest and also other questions you might have. We look at our social media, we try and respond to it, but these are all the platforms we're on. Lastly, we have the Fluke Biomedical Advantage Training Center. This is super important for us. This is how we get more training out to the field. This is free to our audience. All you have to do is register. We have self-paced free training, quizzes, white papers, application notes, and other videos. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation and take questions.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, now we'll do a brief Q&A session. Below is the first question. Can I test the Sp02 sensor on my finger?
No, that's probably not the best method to do that. I know a lot of people used to do that, but you don't know, you're not calibrated. So it's better to use a functional tester.
Great. And if my tester doesn't have the R curve for my device, can I just test using a different R curve?
No, you probably shouldn't do that. Most of the manufacturers have to do a very specific R curve around the sensor and the firmware that they've written around that.
Okay, and what equipment do I need to calibrate my Sp02 sensor?
So calibration can't be conducted in the field. You'll have to send that back to the manufacturer or discard it if it's a disposable.
Okay, and how do I test a reflective Sp02 sensor?
So right now there isn't a tester on the market for a reflective Sp02 sensor, but many of us are working on one.
Okay, and how do I develop a test procedure for testing Sp02 sensors?
Could you repeat that?
How do I develop a test procedure for testing Sp02 sensors?
Yeah, sure. So the first place to start is with the manufacturer service manual. That's the place where all of the service conditions should be outlined from the manufacturer. You can also look at Toby Clark's MDQA book as a reference.
Great. And can you comment on electrical versus optical simulators for Sp02?
Sure. So an electrical tester basically tests the continuity of the cable and tests that the cable is in good shape. An optical simulator, which is what most of us have, tests the actual sensor along the R curve. We have an older product called the Index that still tests electrically, and that's the basic difference, whether or not you're just testing the optical sensor or you're testing the continuity of the cable as well.
Okay, and how do I develop a test procedure for testing Sp02 sensors?
Yeah, so again, I go back to the service manual for the particular product and look at that and any conditions that they outline, or you can look at the Toby Clark MDQA book for recommendations.
And where can I learn more about this?
So our Advantage Training Center can be accessed from www.flukebiomedical.com. It's a great place to get more training.
Great. And now I'm just looking at all the reader questions, or the, okay. Someone asked about a non-standard R curve in a measurable way. They have a Spacelab Sp02 algorithm.
So some of the manufacturers embed other manufacturers' technology. So manufacturers such as Nonin and others are embedded in larger patient monitors. The key is to understand from the monitor manufacturer which technology they're using so that we can get to which R curve. You have to match the sensor to the R curve very specifically, or you'll get an inaccurate measurement.
Thank you. And do you have a product that complies with ISO 80601-261?
So that is the overarching standard, and our products do comply in certain ways to that standard, but they're not comprehensive. So in the standard, it calls out for a lot of testing, usually done by the manufacturer. I wouldn't expect hospital biomeds to have to do the complete standard.
Okay, and is the R curve associated with the monitor or the probe when the manufacturer of the monitor uses other probes?
Probe. The R curve goes with the probe because it's dependent on the sensor and the photodetector and usually the associated firmware that's embedded. So when one medical device company who produces the Sp02 sensor embeds that into another device, they usually carry over all of the sensor company's firmware and R curve. So it goes with the sensor.
Okay, thank you. And what is the best way to test Masimo rainbow parameters?
So we have a product, ProSim8. There are other products out there to test it. The important thing is that typically you have to have a very specialized tester or accessory to be able to test it, because the Massimo uses different photo emitters and different photo detectors.
Great, okay. And does Fluke supply any calibrators, simulators, or testers for reflective pulse ox sensors?
Okay, so nobody produces any calibration devices. The standard says that there's no such thing as a simulator in Sp02 yet. But as far as testers, we are working on reflective pulse ox testers, but I don't think there's any on the market today. And mostly that is to do with the mechanical spacing of along the same plane of the photodetector and the photoemitter. Those can change by manufacturer, so we're having a hard time figuring out how to actually build a single tester to be able to test the broad array of reflective Sp02 sensors.
Great, and the readers tend to have a lot of questions about R curves and more just about R curves associated with the monitors or probe when the manufacturer of the monitor uses other probes. I know you kind of covered that, but can you talk about that more in depth?
Yeah, sure. So the R curve is developed by the manufacturers during the development process, and they have to do a clinical study, usually what's called a breathe-down study, where a patient is actually deprived of oxygen and their blood gases are measured during that. And so the specific curve or absorption of red and IR light along the absorption curve creates your R curve. And so it's very specific to the sensor and the firmware or algorithms that are incorporated with that sensor.
Great. And what do you do about testing LED wavelength accuracy?
So there are some testers on the market that will do that. We typically don't need to. You're basically just testing the R curve to determine if the device is still functioning to specifications.
Thank you. And someone said, I work exclusively in veterinary medicine, where the most common sensor is a lingual clip. Most analyzers seem to be designed to only accept finger sensors. Am I mistaken with this impression?
If it's a transmissive product, it can be usually tested on any of our testers, so long as we have the R curve. If the manufacturer isn't as well known or hasn't worked with any of the test equipment companies, the R curve might not be embedded. And typically, even with the disposable sensors, they're meant to go on a finger or on a ped or a neonate, or perhaps in other applications, you might put it on the ear or other place where there's a arterial pulsation. I'm not familiar with that particular monitor, but usually it's incumbent upon both us as a test equipment manufacturer and the manufacturer of the monitor to try and work together to get the R curves into the devices for our common customers.
Thank you. And how are R curves developed, and how many different R curves are there, and which R curves are the most frequent?
So that's a tough question. So I've talked about how they're developed through these breathe-down studies in oxygen deprivation, and it's sensor by sensor. And there are what I believe are dozens of different sensor and firmware combinations from various manufacturers.
Great. I'm reading more. We're getting great questions. Would simulators like the ProSim8 be representative of infants or newborns?
So yes, we do have pediatric ability, and I believe most of the other testers do as well.
Let me see some more questions. This is great. Okay, I think we already asked that one. Can you just talk about more of the calibrators, simulators, and testers that Fluke supplies?
Sure. So we have a whole line of simulators, our ProSim series, that test a variety of physiological parameters. Our ProSim8 is our leading product. It tests the most parameters. And then we've got some other products, ProSim4, ProSim3, and our Spotlight to test Sp02 only. And you can find out all kinds of information about those products on our website.
Great. And what is there to be said about the R curve editor for Fluke products if there is a process for approval for other manufacturers?
So using our optional answer software, you can put in custom R curves. So manufacturers who use our device can do some testing with their probes, doing it that way. That's certainly a viable way to do it. Another way is when we get demand in the market, we'll reach out to a monitor manufacturer, and often a monitor manufacturer will reach out to us, which is great. We'd love to have that information. And then when we do software firmware updates, we try to include new R curves when we get them.
Thank you. And what's Fluke's latest Sp02 simulator model? This person says they currently use Fluke's Index R2 RS232.
Sure. So the Index 2 is a great product because it does both optical and electrical simulations. Our newer products, our newest products, are the ProSim 8 or our Spotlight product, which test optically only.
And people are really just interested in the Fluke product. Can you please just talk about more of your products and what you think that the listeners need to know about them?
Yeah, sure. So again, ProSim 8 flagship product. It's fairly portable. It's an 8-in-1 simulator. Tests ECG, respiration, non-invasive blood pressure, invasive blood pressure, temperature, several other parameters. And then, like I said, we've got smaller, more portable products. Depending on what your needs are and which kind of monitors you've got, will satisfy the need. And again, FlukeBiomedical.com is a great place to get all of that.
And is there anything else you want to tell the listeners?
Again, let's just be careful about a functional tester versus calibration and simulators. Right now, we can only test the R curves. We're not testing the entire system or anything like that. The other thing is be very careful about the R curve and make sure that it's matching the sensor that you're using. Otherwise, you'll get inaccurate results.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I want to conclude by saying thank you to our presenter, who did a wonderful job, as well as our audience members and our sponsor, Fluke Biomedical. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you may rewatch for free anytime in the next year using the same link you used to log on today. And feel free to share the link with colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Also, please email me at kstevens, and that's Stevens the PH, at medcor, and that's medqor.com, with questions, comments, and future webinar suggestions. And be sure to visit us at www.24x7mag.com. And also, thank you for participating in today's webinar. And for more information, please contact Fluke Biomedical at 800-850-4608. And again, that's 800-850-4608. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.